Very pleased to have with us on the program right now the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Raquel Rutledge. Raquel, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And again, congratulations to you and your colleagues for some really fantastic investigative work there at the Journal-Sentinel. I mean, we were watching a congressional subcommittee hearing take place in Washington, D.C. today that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say probably would not have happened had it not been for the reporting of the Journal-Sentinel, the Oregonian, and some of the papers that covered the storefront operations of the ATF. And now your investigations continue. You've got a new series out talking about how ATF agents have lost dozens of government-issued firearms over the past couple of years.
Well, that's right. We got records that were requested about a year ago through a FOIA, which we've been waiting on, for months and months, and they dumped them on us on, I guess it was Wednesday or Tuesday, maybe it was, and just revealing the details on how these agents have lost guns or had them stolen, just leaving them in their unlocked cars, underneath the seats in their cars, or leaving them in bathrooms by mistake, because there's just a host of ways that these guns get lost. And it's hard to say currently, but it was from past reviews. The Inspector General did a report back in 2008 and found that they lost them or had them stolen at double the rate of other federal agencies, such as agents, those in the FBI and DEA.
And you said as well that it's unclear if these records include quote-unquote missing guns, which is an entirely different category. They're not lost, they're not stolen, but we don't know what happened to them?
Yeah, they don't show up in inventory. And so when we were trying to compare the numbers with those that we had from a previous report, which was back in 2008, where it said 76 had been lost over the course of 5 years, those included missing guns. So those were ones that just didn't turn up in their inventory, no explanation why. The ones we got just recently, we couldn't tell if it included that or not. So it's hard to be sure that we were comparing apples to apples. But either way, it's a lot of weapons misplaced and lost. Now, granted, some of them were recovered fairly swiftly, which is what ATF officials, like to say that, they were lost, but they were found. Well, some of them were found, and some of them, weren't. And there was definitely some time lapse in there where they could have caused harm.
And it's interesting. You point out as well that back in 2007, the ATF adjusted the suspension for a first-time loss of a weapon. It was 3 days unpaid leave if you lost your gun. They reduced that down to 1 day, but they said that they reduced the penalty because they wanted to encourage people to report these things more quickly. The idea being that, well, if they're not going to get in as much trouble, perhaps they'll be less reluctant to report when something like this happens.
Well, that's right. It sounds like they're having trouble getting people to report. And you saw in our story the one example of the man whose gun was ultimately found in the storm drain by a pair of 6-year-old children. Mm-hmm. He wasn't going to report it. He didn't think it was reportable that he wasn't missing his gun. And I think, it's hard to say how widespread that thinking is, that mentality is. But clearly, it's an issue when you've got them changing the penalty to address that. Absolutely.
Now, again, there are, as you point out, roughly 2,400 agencies, 45 incidents between 2009 and 2003. So it's not as if every ATF agent has a case like this on their record. But you point out again that the agency apparently loses or has guns stolen far more frequently than other federal law enforcement agencies, and that is the concern. When you look at this in conjunction with the previous series that the Journal-Sentinel did on these storefront operations, where, again, you all reported that the ATF had allowed felons to walk out of these storefronts with firearms, that they were not allowed to operate. I tell you, it just raises the question of, what are the policies? What are the procedures over there? I know that the deputy director who testified today said, well, we've got a new guidebook, a new manual for these operations. But how on earth does some of this stuff take place without anybody raising red flags? I mean, some of the things that you guys have documented are just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it is curious. And the experts that I've talked to, both former law enforcement officials and current law enforcement officials that work with ATF and other agencies, I mean, it boils down to leadership is what I keep hearing. And, when it comes to lost and stolen guns, for example, you talk to others and they say, you know what? Yeah, it happens in other agencies. Local police lose it. It happens from time to time, but they make a big deal out of it when it happens. It's a big thing. And it seems from the research that we've done, it seems like ATF doesn't necessarily want to do that. From again, like just from all the research we've done with current and former employees, it doesn't sound like they want to fully face, front on some of these issues that they have. So, I mean, it boils down to leadership is what we keep hearing from numerous sources.
All right. Now, do you have more stories coming out? Will we be seeing more on this in the Journal-Sentinel?
Well, we will. They keep giving us little things to, little things keep coming up and think, oh, okay, now we need to look at that. So, yeah, I don't think it's over yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the other things this deputy director said today, right early on in his testimony, he said, these storefront operations are a valuable investigative technique. Between 2009 and 2013, he said we had 37 storefront operations. There was one active in 2013, and there are no active operations right now in 2014. And I just find it curious, Raquel, that on the one hand, these can be valuable operations. We had dozens of them in a 4-year period. Now we don't have any of them, but they're still really valuable, and no reason really to be alarmed or concerned about anything that took place here.
Right. It sounds like they kind of want to have it both ways. They don't want to accept complete guilt for it, but want to leave it open the door. And I mean, but he did say, hey, if they're properly trained and done well, then they can be. But when you look at what the goal is to get the big crime bosses and big violent criminals, you're also the way by the nature of these storefronts that you're going to get a lot of other folks in there that you don't have control over. So I think it's interesting that they talk about having it in a controlled environment. But the truth is, you're not in control of who walks in your door.
No, absolutely not. And if it's a controlled environment, that raises all kinds of questions about, youth drinking, doing drugs, as was alleged to have occurred at the storefront operation in Oregon, which you all point out was set up right across the street from a middle school. It's just, again, I don't know how closely you're able to follow the hearing in Washington today, but I hope that this is not the last of it.
Yeah, I watched every bit of it, and I did give him credit for saying, hey, that was a mistake. Now, what he didn't say, though, is that it wasn't the only one. We found the ones in Pensacola and elsewhere were also in safe zones. So while he said it was a mistake, I also found it curious that he said they were looking for a lease that was 1 year versus 2 years. And that just didn't sound reasonable to me, and that most places are 1 year leases. You don't often come across, where you're forced into a 2-year lease, so that didn't sound credible. To me, there were a number of other things, but I mean, like I said, I give them credit for saying, hey, acknowledging that was a mistake, acknowledging that the agents in Portland that encouraged the tattoos on the neck, didn't use the greatest judgment. In his word, that wasn't, his word was not great judgment. So they do acknowledge their deficiencies.
Well, that's something. Listen, Raquel, thank you again for coming on the program, and best of luck to you and your colleagues there at the Journal-Sentinel.
Thanks very much.